our first presenter. This is Mary Ann Morreale, and she works with leaders finding their way in uncertainty. She's a certified leadership coach through Georgetown University. She spent 24 years in the U.S. Air Force. My parents were both Air Force, so I have a lot of fondness for that organization. And she was a chief operating officer. She was a chief executive officer, and also a Pentagon director. This is pretty heady stuff, guys. She's worked in local, regional, national arenas, and while working the healthcare re-engineering program with the Department of Defense, she worked with David Cooperrider, who developed Appreciative Inquiry. She served on nonprofit boards of directors, a board of advisors, and in leadership in service organizations. She is actively involved in Toastmasters International, having served in local, club, and district offices. We are very, very pleased to welcome Mary Ann Morreale.
Welcome, everybody, and let's get the camera going. And welcome to our great webinar. Thank you, Sarah. Thank you, Cynthia, for being able to pull all this together. I am so delighted to be here with you today. You know, leading in conflict really scares a lot of people, and a lot of that has to do with the uncertainty. So this morning, we're going to be talking about leading in conflict and what's behind that and how you can manage that as you go through. You're going to have an opportunity to learn about a couple of techniques that's going to prepare you for conflict. There are different types of intelligences, one of which is really particularly critical for leaders. In the second half of the webinar for this particular section, we're going to cover a topic called Appreciative Inquiry. And I learned about this directly from David Cooperrider when I was working with the Department of Defense Health Reengineering Office. And it was an amazing situation because Appreciative Inquiry can work with one person, a small group, as small as two, and he's actually done this with up to 3,000 people to come to an agreement and a path forward. So this is really, really important things. We're going to be moving fairly quickly today, but I just want you to let you know that if you go to the handout section, all the slides are reprinted in the handout, and so you can follow that information. There's lots of resources available on the slides and at the end of the presentation as well. So let's move right into the topic. Conflict is all around us, and it's a challenge if you're a leader. Picture yourself in a meeting where conflict is going on, or even knowing you're going into a meeting. Now, very few people are really comfortable with conflict. And we're going to talk a little bit about what that brings up. But here to function in this kind of an environment is one of the most important things. So let's take a moment to prepare. Oh, sorry for my clock, guys. All right, let's do what's called a body scan. What I want you to do is notice any sensation that you're feeling in your body. And we're going to move slowly through your body from the top of your head, down through your face and your head, and slowly throughout. So start at the top and just notice what's going on there. Notice if you feel any temperature changes, what's going on there. And slowly move from the top of your head, down through your face, all around your head, and just notice. Go down through the jaw, what's happening there, down through your neck, down through your shoulders, through your body, through your arms, your legs, and down into your feet. And just notice and be aware. Now what I want you to do is count, to the count of 10, breathe in, and to the count of 6, breathe out. So breathe in to the count of 4, 2, 3, 4. And out, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And just breathe in and out gently. And just quickly go back through the scan of your body. And see if breathing in and breathing out to this slow rhythm, breathing in and breathing out. See and notice anything different. Okay, now let's come back into the present and let's move into our presentation. What I'd like you to do is I'm working here to move my slide stuff. Okay, here's a situation that's coming that you're going to be facing. Let's see what's going on here. Oh no, a meeting. I have to meet this guy, our furnace guy, at home. No, I can't get out of this. I have to be here. We never get anything done at these meetings. Now I can share all my great ideas. Bummer. Not again. I'm always the last to know. Now, how are you feeling right now? Check in your body. Is there something going on here? Is there something different? You're going to go in and you're going to be running a meeting with these people. What kind of conflict might be coming up? What is that making you feel? Sorry, let's stop that. Okay, so now think about this meeting you're going to go into. Go through this body scan and look and see and notice what's different. Raise your hand if you notice a difference after watching this video. Okay, let's move on to some of the more intellectual portion of this presentation. There's 3 different types of intelligences that one needs to think about when you're in a leadership position. The first one, that's one we've all heard about. You know, the guy who's very quick when he introduces himself to tell you he's got an IQ of 160 or 154. Well, that basically talks about their ability to process information and make understanding of that information compared to everybody else. That's intellectual intelligence. Let's now move to technical. That's the skills portion. That's that guy in the office that when a process breaks down, you go talk to Charlie and say, Charlie, what happened? What do we need to do to fix this? Or a machine breaks down. That is a technical skill. But here's the third one. The third type is emotional intelligence, and it has to do with relationships. And this is your ability, as well as everybody else, to be able to relate to one another and to be able to understand what's really going on with the emotions. So when we look at these 3 intelligences, which do you think is the most important? I'm going to go to each one. I'm going to ask you to raise your hand. If you think intellectual intelligence is the most important piece, raise your hand now. Again, intellectual is the smarts. It is the knowledge base that people operate from. Okay, let's move over to the technical side. How many of you think having the skills, knowing all the detail, how the job is done, is that the most important thing for a leader? Raise your hand. Okay, now, what about the third one? Is emotional intelligence the most important thing for a leader to be able to focus on and to be able to do? That's the ability to relate. All right, let's see what the experts say. Here's a quote from Daniel Goleman, and it basically shares that emotional intelligence is really the most important piece. And it used to be thought that the intellectual piece was, but the latest studies that have been coming out show that one really must be able to understand the emotional side and be able to then work with the people around them in order to truly be a great leader. And many organizations are measuring how high the emotional quotient is in their potential leaders of the future. So let's talk about emotions then. The Dalai Lama commissioned a study, and it was quite expensive. And what he wanted to do was to identify what are the universal emotions that one sees in the world and around the world. And they identified 5 different emotions that really show up. They also identified the ranges from minimal to intense. And then they looked at triggers. And what they found is that, you know, there are some universal triggers that go around the world that no matter where you are, that will trigger a response, an emotion in somebody. But there's also very local ones. And so those of you in Connecticut might have a reaction to something versus me up here in the mountains of the Adirondacks with the deer and the wildlife might have a very different reaction to. And there's also cultural differences and triggers. And it's important as a leader that we understand there are universal, there are local, and there are cultural. And we don't always know what those local and cultural ones are. But the other thing the Dalai Lama found is that there's actually specific actions that are related to each one of these emotions. Now let's look at the first emotion, and that is anger. Anger shows up in every place, and the state or the range goes from minimal to very, very strong. Now, how many of us have really seen this come into play? Quite often, anger is the one that shows up in the public face. And so one of the big things here to realize is everybody is triggered when somebody blocks them, their action, their movement, or trying to get something done. But when you think about people who get really upset about bureaucracy and the inefficiency, excuse me, that might actually be a very local thing. You may not find that in another culture. So it's important, again, to realize that anger shows up across the world. And this is the ways that it shows up. Now, the passive aggressive, you know, the guy that shuts down, or the woman who refuses to talk in a meeting after they feel like they've been put down or something, all the way up to actually, I know someone who told me a story about their boss threw a trash can at them in a meeting because they were upset. Really? I mean, is that the kind of thing as a leader that we want to be seeing? Let's look at the next one. The next one is fear. Now, fear, we can all relate to that, right? It can be from very minimal to hugely frightening. And it can we can go from avoiding to yelling and screaming. So here's one. You're walking along the road and you notice some unevenness in the road. And there's actually a small hole. And so you walk around to the sidewalk where it's nice and smooth, and you avoid that piece that you're uncertain to walk in, that uneven ground. Now think of yourself, you're in Florida on vacation, you're taking a walk around this canal, this little lake that the canal feeds into, and all of a sudden this alligator jumps out at you and starts chasing you. Well, you're going to yell, scream, and you're going to try and run faster than your friend standing next to you. That is the difference in the parameters or the scope of the fear. Now notice what is a universal type of situation for this fear. And basically any kind of bodily impact, that object that's flying at your windshield, or that Ferris wheel where your thing drops 10 feet, or you see something out of the corner of your eye swiggling and you're startled. And here's an interesting piece. I did not put this in for the local. This came out of the Dalai Lama study, but public speaking is very much a local kind of a fear. I guess we can all relate to that one. Now, the third emotion of the 5 is disgust. And this again has the range from disliking something to totally loathing something. And the actions that are typical are you avoid it again, or you might even vomit. Now, I'll tell you that you might say, well, vomit's kind of strong. Well, just ask my brother-in-law when he has to go pick up dog poop in the yard. I mean, that he loathes that so much that he has to hold himself back. So these are the kinds of things that will come up. Anything that comes out of the body is universal, something that's rotting or decaying. And I'm not going to talk too much about the local, because in this country, it's not just fans of opposing sports teams that are getting into the disgust mode here. So we all have been exposed to that. Now, let's stop for a minute and look at the sadness stage. Now, the sadness stage is very, very prominent. And we never really know in some people where it's coming from. And it can go from very minor disappointment. Gee, I really wanted to go to take that trip and something came up at work and I can't do it, to the anguish of having lost somebody very close to ourselves, or being rejected, thinking that you're on a path to a significant promotion and it's not there, and what that will do. And the actions here is a lot of people feel shame, and shame often comes from not being enough, which then drives people into the sadness. And it can also make them withdraw. So it's important to understand when people's actions show up, that that's information that leads you back to the kind of emotion that they might be feeling right now that you may need to deal with as a leader. And again, the triggers, these are the universal ones. Being rejected, not only sadness, but some of the other emotions, that's a key one. And the local, not being invited to the party. We talk about a lot of our youth today and how they're feeling excluded and how the depression levels is so high. Well, being excluded or feeling that you've lost your status or not being part of a status can all fold into this sadness piece that you as a leader might need to have to deal with. Now, finally, enjoyment. We've talked about 4 ones that many people think is very negative, but here's joy. And enjoyment comes out in many, many different ways. Let's say, well, actually, do all of you feel joy in your life? Have you stopped feeling the joy because you've been caught up in all of the adult activities that you need to be doing? Well, if you have, stop and look at a playground and see what's going on with those children, and look at how they just enjoy being in the moment and being caught up with what's happening and what's around them. And so you can go back and find that enjoyment if you're missing it, or if you want more of it, by looking at the sensory experience in nature. Take a walk, take a trip, or help others, or local. Maybe your thing is badminton. That's kind of old-fashioned. Maybe it's skiing down the slopes this time of the winter. But enjoyment comes in many different forms. Now, we've talked about the emotions. One of the emotions, what happens when the emotion becomes so intense that it's overwhelming? Well, here's what happens. This part of the brain is the prefrontal cortex. This is where all your decision-making happens. It is where your logic comes into play, the rational part of the brain. Now, back here in the back part of your brain, down near the brainstem, is this little teeny piece of the brain called the amygdala. And this part activates when you feel threatened, or when the feeling is so intense that it's wondering what's going on. And you know what? This teeny little part of your brain is able to take over the entire brain and shut everything down. So have you ever wondered why, when somebody's really acting out, and you try to rationalize with them why they can't come to you, why they can't go there? It's because the amygdala, that primitive part of your brain, has kicked in, and yes, it has hijacked the entire brain. It pulls the blood supply away from the front of the brain, sucks it back to the back and into parts of the body that may need to run or freeze or fight. And so this part of the brain is not functioning. All you are doing is reacting. And as a leader, you need to know when that amygdala hijack shows up in you, or when it shows up in somebody that you're working with. And yes, it can take quite a while for that amygdala hijack to shut down. So where do you go from here? What do you do? Here is a key piece. The first thing is recognize, oh, I've just been hijacked. This is a problem. Or Sally's just been hijacked. You can go back to that breathing thing that we talked about, that rhythmic breathing, and center yourself. And even if it's the other person, you may be picking up some of that in yourself as a result. Here's the second most important thing, and that is focus on understanding. Don't go into judgment. Oh, there she goes again. She's always so emotional. Oh, there he is. He just can't control his anger. He's got these problems. That's the wrong place to go. You want to go into understanding. What's behind this? And what's most important is you want to avoid triggering hijacks in other people. And one way that you can do this, instead of making a statement, you are doing this, I see you doing this, you can ask a question. What's going on? What's happening? What's behind this? What will make this better? So here are the things that people want. They want to feel that they are valued and that all of these things are in place. And it's your job as a leader to be able to help them feel those things. Now I'm going to touch very briefly on the essential skills for building authentic community, because a leader that is working from the emotional quotient and intelligence standpoint, they're really about building this authentic community. And one of the key things is emotion is just information. Don't react to it. If it's an uncomfortable emotion and it's yours, just be there. Just ride that wave until it waxes away. If it's somebody else, just be there with them and see if they can ride that out or help them to ride that out. And misbehavior, too, is another form of communication. So if they're acting out, what's behind that? Try to understand. The big thing is, so many of us want to be helpful. We want to go in and make it better for others. You can't do that. They are the ones that are going to have to fix it. You could help bring them back to this status of non-amygdala hijack, but you can't fix their problem. And one of the key things to be able to bring this together is to hold this space of possibility and to make it okay in this space of possibility for every person to be their authentic self. Let's move now into appreciative inquiry. This is a wonderful process. And as I said earlier, you can do appreciative inquiry. I've done it myself in a program that I've written, a retreat I've written. I've then gone back and gone through it one-on-one, just by myself as a renewal. I've done it with 2 people. You can do it with more. And as I said, David Copperfield has done it with 3,000 people in an organization over a period of 3 days for them to come out at the end with this amazingly wonderful vision and pathway forward to their future. So appreciative inquiry started actually with the last 4 of these items on the slide. And he has since added this first one, which is defining and the focus of what that desired future is. So that's one of the key things. We'll talk about each one of these a little bit more in future slides. But basically, once you've defined it, then you're going to be talking about discovering the best of what is, dreaming of the best of what could be, and then designing the best of what should be. And then destiny is designing the best of what will be. And we're going to talk a little bit more about each one of these in a moment. Positive core is something that David has brought in since I did some of the initial work with him. And it has to do with coming from a very strong central place. And that central place is an idea of, if you are consistently focusing on that central positive piece and asking those questions, then the organization is going to continue to move forward, or even you yourself. And if all of the actions or means are aligned with that persistent inquiry, and the ends are as well, and they're all positive, then the core strengths emerge and the organization can move forward much, much more quickly and effortlessly. So here's what Peter Drucker says. And basically, a lot of the old way of thinking about leadership was, let's do strengths and weaknesses, but let's focus on the weaknesses and how we can solve the weaknesses. Well, that's like telling a great golfer like Woods to focus on doing math in school instead of focusing on his golf. Focus on strengths, and then the weaknesses become irrelevant because he can go hire anybody to do the math that he needs with the salary as a golfer. Now let's talk about the affirmative topic choice. This is really critical because it has to be really, really clear. And the first questions we ask are really the ones that set the stage for moving forward. Here's some samples of questions that you could ask, let's say in your Toastmaster club, that may not be as strong and as vital as you'd like to have. So you could go in and you could ask this question. This is very different than saying, you know, what's wrong with us? What do we need to fix? This talks about what it's like. What has it been? What will it look like? And this will help you then to go into the next stages. And the other thing is, you really want to be very, very open in this discussion and inclusive, and include everyone who's going to be operating and being involved in this section, if they're willing to be involved. Now, here is the first stage. Now, discovery is a key part, and this is where we really bring appreciation in and really hone it. What is the best of what we have, and what do we like about this? And here it's really a give and take kind of a relationship. And when David does his programs, and when I include this in my programs, I will actually break large groups into dyads, 2 people, with one person sharing and the other person just recording, and then switch, and then the other person will share and the other person will record with no questions, because you're just listening, you're just receiving. And that's how you can unearth those gems that are worth valuing, by getting that direct input from different people. As we move into the dream section, this is important that you don't put any qualifiers on this, because you really want to look at what is the ideal. What is the best of what could be? Be open to possibilities. Use that curiosity of a child. Remember those children that will ask you, why are you doing that? Well, why do you do it that way? Well, why does it happen that way? Those children are so curious, and they're looking to find out information and what's going on and how does that relate. Use those curiosity questions in your dreaming. And you might want to actually phrase them in a what type of a question. What would make a difference? So let's take a moment and think about what it might be to dream at this step. Let's set the stage about curious questions. Let's dream about what you might want in the future. Now, it doesn't matter if it never happens. We don't need to even get it right now. Let's just play with the options like those children play. Okay, take a minute. Look into the future and you see yourself. You are engaged in your club and the members are engaged. You're having fun, you're learning. You are seeing the results of actively participating in Toastmasters. You are more comfortable helping new members take on a new meeting role. You can answer a question that your boss throws at you in a meeting. And being a club officer has actually helped you when your boss asks you to take on a project, because you know now how to go find out what the expectations are, find out what's needed, and know who you can tap into as a team, because you've experienced that in Toastmasters. So let's ask some of those questions in the dream section. What excites you about being a member of this club, and what brings people together? What excites you about that situation? What excites you about being a member of the area? Maybe you haven't been, but what would excite you? What would get you involved? What would get you involved at the division or the district level, maybe even international? What could that mean to you? Use your curiosity to dream. What would make it easier? Dream about that. Dream about all the things that could be there to make it easier for you to be involved and engaged. All right, let's stop now and let's move into the design. You've done all of that work of dreaming, coming up with all the possibilities, no judgment, anything is possible. Put that out there. Now you're going into the design work. This is what you're saying, okay, we've talked about what could be. Now let's hone in on what should be, so that we can kind of move to the future stages after this. And you allow it to come out of a positive past. You've talked about the best of what is and what you've done, and that comes from the past perspective. And you dreamt about the best of what could be in the future. Now you're going to allow it to emerge from that discussion the design of the best of what should be. And you will work with your group to do that. And so you're going to be creating something new. And in creating that new from this positive standpoint, you're actually going to multiply your energies that you would not otherwise have noticed. And that's how you're going to start working your design. Now, let's talk about destiny. Destiny is what will be. And destiny has several different components. And one of those is, what is your particular role in creating this destiny? Because it doesn't happen unless you're part of it. Now, yes, you could step back and step out, but do you really want to do that? Or do you want to be part of this wonderful new moving forward that your group, your company, your organization, maybe even your family, you're going to use this with your family, but you're going to create and step into your role. And so part of this might be, what is your role? You know, be flexible. In designing your role, be what they call agile. Be ready to dance in the moment and allow inspiration to kind of bubble up into this process. Because you know what? You're not committing to an outcome here. What you're committing to is the possibility. And that's a huge difference than being committed to making sure that a particular outcome comes out. So when you think about creating your role, here's a question. What kinds of roles and responsibilities do you enjoy and feel good about? Now, when was the last time somebody in your club asked you that versus asking you, would you be sergeant at arms or would you be president? What a difference that makes. Feel your body, go back into that sense of your body. When somebody walks up to you and says, I want you to be division director, or I want you to be president of your club, notice what you're feeling. Now, take a look and see what this question does. What kinds of roles and responsibilities do you enjoy? And what makes you feel good doing? And then from there, creating the next step into what role you're going to take. Because it's in finding out what you enjoy and what you are good at that you can build on those strengths we talked about earlier. And then what about committing to the possibility? Most decisions are not irrevocable. And so they can also be adapted. And that's what we're talking about when we talk about being open to the inspired future here for the folks, that for yourself and for others. But the next step, and here's the key, quite often we get up to this point, but then we forget to stop it, to basically stop and realize that now the next thing is to step into action. And how do we do that? Well, you know, there are some planners like me who are seeing, here we are at A, and I can see the double Z and all the steps in between, and I can put timelines to that. That's not what we're talking about here. What we're talking about here is, what is your next step? And what I'd suggest to you is think about, what can I do right now? At the end of this session, what can I do with what I have learned about emotions and about appreciative inquiry? What's the first thing I can do? It can be really, really small, but what's something I can take from here? And then I would suggest that you say, what can I do in the next week that builds on what I've learned today? And put that on, but you don't have to start it until you've done that task today. So don't be jumping into the future when we want you to be present right here and right now. Let's move now to, again, back to Daniel Goleman, who is a huge leader in this emotional quotient EQ piece of learning and study. And when he talks about leaders and the emotional pieces that are components involved with leadership, he talks about these 5 pieces. Well, self-awareness, we've talked about the different kinds of emotions. We've talked about tuning into your body, and you can do that very slowly. the self-awareness, you can actually do a scan in sort of a neutral mode before you get into a situation, so that you know this is how your body feels when you are in a neutral space. So that when something happens, you can quickly just kind of go, what am I feeling something different? Oh, it's hitting me right here. I feel so tight around here, or maybe my throat feels really tight. That can allow you then to kind of breathe into that and let that go, and be ready to kind of move into the leadership pieces. The motivation, empathy, and social skills, a lot of what we talked about the emotions and the atlas of emotions that was generated by the Dalai Lama, is going to help you with those social skills as well as the empathy. The motivation, motivation is yours. You have to be self-motivated. You can provide opportunities for people, but that's not going to motivate them. It comes from within. And part of that is, as a leader, is what is your motivation? What fires you up? What makes your heart sing? Those are questions to ask yourself. What makes my heart sing? But I'm going to stop for a minute and I'm going to go back to self-regulation, because we did a little bit about that earlier, but I want to take you there in the last few minutes that we have. Now, HeartMath Institute, I ran into them when I was in the healthcare reengineering department at Department of Defense, and this was amazing. It was the late 1900s, and so they were just in the early stages. They have done a boatload of research since then, and I encourage you to go out to their site. But this is a very brief exercise, and what it does is it helps to regulate your nervous system. And there's two parts of your nervous system. One generates the fight and flight, and the other one sends out impulses that allow you to relax and to bold. And so what happens when they're fighting one another is your fight and flight jumps up, and then the other one tries to calm you down, and then it jumps up and it calms you down, it jumps up. And that's not what you want. That's going to trigger where you end up being jumped up and you're in that amygdala hijack. What you want to see is a nice even wave where that fight, flight, being prepared for danger, and the being neutral, being calm, being in control, kind of creates an up and down gentle wave that you're riding without a lot of huge peaks and valleys going on. Here's a technique that HeartMath taught back in the day, and they incorporate in their training today. But the first thing is to breathe. You have to breathe. So breathing into the count of 4 and out to the count of 6 creates a pattern that actually helps to regulate the heart rate. And the heart rate and the variability within the heart rate actually plays a huge part in sending impulses to the amygdala and parts of the brain. So by breathing into a count of 4 and breathing out to a count of 6, you can bring your system back into cohesiveness or coherence. Now, some people find it really helpful, if you're not in a meeting, to actually raise their hands and breathe into the count of 4, 2, 3, 4, and out 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And that action of actually including the body can actually create a much greater release in the out breath. You can do that before a meeting. You can do that when you're doing something at home, or you can just mentally think of yourself doing it, but breathe in and out. It doesn't have to be strenuous. I've done this in meetings where there were different people from different federal agencies, and they were all arguing back and forth. I started this, and it was amazing, because if you have a strong enough sense of this nervous energy system coming into play, and you're the one that is holding that, you can actually influence the others around you. Now, the other part of HeartMath that's really key is you can do that, but you magnify the results by, when you're breathing in and breathing out, to think of someone, something, or some place that you absolutely love or appreciate. And then while holding that image, you continue to breathe and bring that image and your breathing down into your heart area, and just do that. And you can do it as quickly as 20 seconds, and you will be amazed at how much your emotions come back into coherence. Now, here's some resources that will take you into more depth in the topics that I've brought up with you today. And I really encourage you to look at these. Now, we did not talk about the feeling wheel. There are a lot of different emotion wheels, feeling wheels, but if you're the kind of person that is very much in your head and not basically into feelings and heart stuff, I find this feeling wheel or those like it are really helpful to help me label the different types of feelings and the different aspects within the range that we talked about in the Dalai Lama work. Because when you can name the emotion, that's the first step in breaking out of that amygdala hijack. Oh, that's anger showing up. And then that helps your brain kind of reconnect to the intelligence section of the frontal cortex. So I want to share with you one more time. How do you feel now about being ready to deal with Charlie, who's going to meet the furnace guy and really doesn't want to be there? And how about Nadia, who has the baby at home and it was her turn to pick up the baby and her husband's not happy? Or maybe John, who he just hates meetings that go nowhere. And what about Sally? Yep, she always likes to talk to us at meetings. Oh, there's Sue. You know, she just is having such trouble these days. Oh, and here comes Tom. You know, now you're ready. Go ahead, charge forward, and take off to the next step. And with that, I'm going to turn it back to, hang on, we don't need to do another meeting, to Cynthia and our next portion of this part of the webinar. Cynthia, are you there? All right, well, we get Cynthia back online. This is a great place for us to be able to, let me just turn my webcam off. I think I have to do that.
Not yet. We've got a little game we're going to play here, Marianne.
Okay.
Before we go into, and we've got a question and answer session with you coming up as well.
Okay.
So if you will come back and join me on screen.
Okay, I should be on screen. Okay, something happened. Let me see if I can work this. Sorry.
Okay, while you're doing that, we're going to do a little table topics-ish kind of moment here, and I'm going to ask you a crazy question and give you just about a minute to answer it. So once there you are. I can see you beautifully. Are you ready to play?
I'm ready.
All right, here's your question. A penguin walks through that door right now wearing a sombrero. What does he say, and why is he here?
Oh my goodness. Yeah, you know what? He just came in through this door, and that sombrero was like almost too big to get through the door. And he came to me and he said, Marianne, I understand that you're in Pathways. And I was at my Toastmaster club up in the down in the Antarctic, and they challenged me under that new evaluation system and said, you need to get better involved and more involved in Pathways. So, you know, I never did read that navigator thing. So I just decided I had to get out, take the first step. And I've come all the way from Antarctica on my pathway to the challenge, but I'm not really sure what I was supposed to be doing because I didn't read the navigator stuff.
Poor penguin. Well, the rest of us, I'm sure, are reading our navigator and finding our way through Pathways. Great answer. Okay, next up, we've got our raffle that's going off for this book. The Cooper Writer and Dirka Whitney, Appreciative Inquiry, A Positive Revolution in Change. And I know for myself, I so enjoyed your presentation, and I got a lot out of it. I totally agree that you've got to be self-aware. You've got to know how you're feeling and how your feelings affect everybody else. And right now, I think we can feel pretty good because we've got a raffle coming up. Now, your job is to pick a number between 1 and 70. I can't hear you. I don't know why not.
Number 1.
You're choosing number 1. Awesome. John, are you with us?
I am. And I'm going to get my
Awesome.
crack team of counters on this right away.
Excellent. So while we go through our question and answer section, John is going to search high and low for attendee number 1, and that attendee will be winning the raffle for Appreciative Inquiry, which looks like it would be a great book. While he's doing that, let's go and see what kind of questions we have. Now, if you do have questions, please, if you've got questions for Mary Ann, please write them into the question box, and we'll see if we can answer those for you. And I'm not seeing any questions yet. If you've got a question, go ahead and type it in, please. All right. John, can you double check to make sure that I'm seeing, because I'm not seeing any questions, and hopefully some of our attendees will write in a question that we can look. I'm not seeing anything in there that hasn't been answered. Can you double check for me and make sure that I'm not missing anything?
Yep, questions are starting to come in, actually. So I'm not sure why you're not seeing the question.
Okay, yeah, now I'm starting to see some.
Okay, good.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
All right, we've got a question. Here's a question from Catherine, and she asks, she says, the early bird gets the worm for the raffle, an inspiration. A question would be to assess the level of conflict for safety. Ideally, deal at a distance and allow folks support to cool down. So how would you assess the level of conflict for safety? And then how would you deal with it? Would you deal with it from a distance? And how would you allow folks support to cool down? Can't hear you. Can't hear you.
Oh, okay. For some
There
reason,
you are.
yeah, for some reason, it wouldn't allow me to unmute the audio. It muted on itself. So this is a technology issue that we're all learning. Part of the process is to, you may have to actually step away and give people space if they are reacting too strongly. Because sometimes there's just no way, as I mentioned, it can take up to 20 minutes for that amygdala hijack to go away and for someone actually to be able to re-engage. So you're going to have to decide that as the leader of the group. But you could also help them to move through. For example, I was working with somebody the other day, orienting them to pathways, and we went through the assessment process. And they had the top 3, and we were talking about what was their choice. And they kind of froze because they were, that uncertainty piece of, I'm making a commitment came up. And one of the ways I was able to help them get out of that, oh my gosh, I've got to make a decision mode, was to basically say, okay, let's look at what this one is and the definition. Now, on a scale of 1 to 10, 1 being it's a breeze, you got that covered, and 10 being, oh, I'm not comfortable at all in this place and I don't have any skills, what number would you assign? And we did that with each one. And the first one, it took her a while to figure out what her number was. But as we went through each one, she became quicker and quicker in being able to decide, oh, that's a 1, that's a 5, that's a 6.5, that's a 9. And so she moved out of that amygdala hijack into being able to make progress to actually come to the end point, which was that decision point, being able to engage that logical mind. So there are ways that you can do that to help somebody. Another thing is to just say, what's going on? Tell me what's going on, or what's behind that? What's really what's underneath that? What's going on in your life? Because it may be something totally different than what you might expect. And here's the other thing, don't project on people. We have a tendency to project on others what we are feeling or what our problems are. and oh, that person's probably coming from this standpoint because X, Y, and Z, and you're now creating a story for them. No, just ask them what's going on. I hope that helps.
Yeah, great. So if somebody is completely upset, you would step away, give them time to cool off. If you were able to engage and get them to be aware of what their level was, then you could start asking them questions.
Mhm.
And the other thing that I'm hearing is, again, that come from compassion, be understanding, start asking questions. So is that the arc that you're talking about?
Absolutely. You as a leader are trying to understand what's going on, where they're coming from, and what's really happening with them. And sometimes you have to let go of what your objective is for that meeting
Right.
in order to get there, because until you're there and you're making that connection with people, you're not going to be able to get to that rational endpoint or process that you're looking to do. Yeah, thanks,
Right.
thanks for summarizing that.
Oh, sure. Now I'm just listening to you. I'm learning a lot. I also feel like it's so easy to either project what I think somebody else is thinking or doing, or to, I mean, very often I will find myself giving advice that's really not necessary. It's not the right response to something where the question would be, or making a decision about what I think is going on with somebody when I'm wrong. And that happens.
Oh, absolutely. What happens there is we trip into the I want to fix it, I want to make it better mode, and versus I want to understand what's going on and letting the other person figure out how to fix it.
Right. Okay, here's another question for you. And I'm sorry, we're probably not going to get to all of them. We'll get to as many of them as we can. This one is coming from John, and he asks, can you give a specific example of how you would use the breathing technique in a contentious meeting?
Oh, yes. As I mentioned in my presentation, I was sitting into Washington, and I was chair of this meeting, and we were looking at sharing health technology among federal agencies. And there was a representative from different federal agencies: Department of Justice, because of the Bureau of Prisons, Public Health, Indian Health, Veterans Affairs. I was doing Department of Defense, Department of Labor, Health and Human Services. Everybody was coming from a different perspective, and we hadn't gotten to the core purpose and agreement even. And they were like back and forth about what was most important. I went into that HeartMath mode without them even realizing. And I steadied my breathing, and I thought about a trip where I had gone skiing, and the entire day I woke up, I knew it was going to be a wonderful day. The entire day I was floating like 2 inches over the snow, and I could do nothing wrong. And so I just brought that feeling back to me as I did the breathing. And what happens is HeartMath has shown in their studies that the electrical field around the heart emotions actually goes out a good 8 feet. And when you're in synchronicity and in that nice sinus wave, that is stronger than that jagged back and forth, fight kind of a deal. And so that 8-foot radius, that took in at least 4 members of that group. And that heart wave, when it's in synchronicity, is strongest. And there are studies that show that if you go into a room full of clocks, pendulum clocks, the largest clock with the largest pendulum, that over time, every other clock will align to that largest pendulum. And that's what happens when you go into this breathing mode. And it doesn't have to be obvious. Nobody knew I was doing it. I fiddled with my papers, so they thought I was looking for something as I was doing this. And I was just kind of sharing this sense of being out on the ski slope, out and let it go where it did. Within, I'd say, 90 seconds, one by one, the whole room quieted down, and we moved into some amazing conversations. So that's what I would share.
Beautiful. Okay, let's see. We've got a question from Blaze. As someone who very much wears my heart on their sleeve, where naming emotions isn't at all an issue, what else can I do to get into a more productive headspace aside from breathing?
Well, I am truly a believer of the breathing technique. But here's one piece, and that is do the breathing, even though but you can do it very subtly. But here's one thing to try and do. When you do that, wiggle your toes. So sit there and start wiggling your toes. Okay, and actually wiggling your toes gives your body something to do besides just feeling that emotion. And breathing, and then take a couple of nice deep breaths in and stop. And now let yourself go into that part of the brain that allows you to do that logical piece. And ask yourself a question. What's most important here? And maybe that will help you then ride into what's the next step. And remember, all you have to do is figure out the next step. You don't have to figure out everything. You do the next step, what's the next one? All right, what's the next one? And that allows you to dance in the moment, because somebody may come in, that penguin may come in, and I might have to change totally what I'm doing because I didn't plan for that. Just a thought.
I find that wiggling my toes makes me want to giggle, which is a fabulous response. It's fun.
Brings that joy piece that the Dalai Lama talked about.
Absolutely, it does. Okay, we've got one here from Melissa. How do you handle emotions which you have felt in the past and you think about them at an inopportune time?
Okay. Again, a lot of the tools we talked about, the breathing, thinking about something that you appreciate or that you love or someplace, can help you step aside from that past feeling. But this really brings up an important piece. In one of the slides, when I talked about authentic community, there was one line in there that really bears some consideration and further research for our listeners. And that's to talk about distinctions between shared emotions. And I'm gonna look at my references here because it's kind of detailed. But there's different kinds of things with shared emotions. One is instructive personal feelings. Now, I would say to Melissa that that past feeling is an instructive personal feeling. That can inform you of something that happened in the past and how you related to it. And do you want to have the reaction again, or do you want a different reaction? Do you want a different way of dealing with that? That's a personal instructive feeling. There's also, it could be this too, there's conditioned emotional patterns. And that's a pattern that you learned before and you kept repeating because you didn't realize and you didn't make choices to break that pattern and do something different. And so you're reacting today to what happened in the past. And that really is not your authentic self today. It is your false self from many, many moons ago. And you want to be your authentic self today. Now, here's one that I find very interesting. It's called affect contagion empathy. That's where, especially for people, I've got a friend who is so sensitive to energy and to people's emotions that she picks up on their emotion all the time. And that's where the aspect, the conscious sensing emotion of, say, you, Cynthia, I might be picking up on that and catching it. So now it feels like it's mine, but it's not really mine. It's really yours, but I caught it. And the other thing is the ambiance. The question earlier about a contentious room or meeting, the ambience or the mood associated with a group or a place can actually influence the rest of the group. And so there may be ways that you might want to adjust that. Maybe get everybody get up, take a walk, come back. There are ways that you can handle that ambiance type of shared emotion. And then on the catching part, there's the emotional resonance. This friend I talked to you about, she is a mental health counselor working with very troubled children. And she has to actually put up some barriers for herself that she doesn't catch the emotion. And even so, some of it does come off. And so she has to have some practices that help her to release those or to recognize in the moment that this is theirs and not mine. And I had a client once where I was so uncomfortable. I was a student in the Georgetown program, and I was doing fine with all my other clients, but this one I was so uncomfortable with. It was so awkward. No matter what I did, seemed to make a difference. And then analyzing the situation, I realized it was her uneasiness, her discomfort in dealing with the discussions that we were having that I was picking up. And I had to learn to not catch those so I could continue to engage with her. So
yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
There's another phenomena that I also find associated with that, and that is if my response is bigger than the event, I know it's got to be connected to something in my past. I'm responding from something that hasn't been resolved. If I drop something and my response is really big, then I have a trigger around dropping things.
Right.
So,
and that's where it helps to go back and look at the trigger. What happened now? What was the trigger that created that overwhelming response and maybe even amygdala hijack? What was the trigger? And then go back and see why, what things trigger me and where in the past might that have happened.
Right. I do need to just make a correction here. It was Jeff and not John who asked the question earlier. So Jeff, I apologize for my mistake. I think we're just about at the end of our questions, and I'm sorry that I wasn't able to answer all of them. I really appreciate those of you attendees who are connected in and asking questions and really involved with us here. It's time now for us to go and find out who the winner is. And before we do that, and thank you so much, Marianne. That was just wonderful. And I've learned so much, and I really enjoyed your presentation.
It's been such a pleasure to be here with you today. And good luck, everybody. I'm looking forward to our next speaker, so stay tuned. Can't wait to hear what you have to share, Cynthia.
Thank you. Those of you who have any questions, if you can't find the question box or if you are having any trouble at all with your tech, you can text your question to John, and that number is 520-419-3959. Again, that number is 520-419-3959. And that's John Hogan. He's our technical director. So if you have any questions or technical issues, feel free to contact him. And now it's time for us to find out who the winner is. John, who's the winner?
Well, Cynthia, the winner of the raffle for the first segment of our presentation today is Aki Ishii. Aki Ishii, you are our winner. You are participant number 1 in the roster.
Awesome.